Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Welcome to Successful Dropout. This podcast is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those that dare to dream and act on their dreams. I'm your host, Kylan Ginger. Join me as we find out what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed as an entrepreneur. What's up, Successful Dropouts? Get stoked because today on the show we have Zach Latta. Zach tested out of high school at the age of 16 and started working full-time as an engineer and lead backend developer at Yo, a one-word messaging app that came to prominence in 2014. Now at 18, Zach is working on his rapidly expanding coding organization called Hack Club. Hack Club is a nonprofit initiative that works with high school students to start and lead coding clubs at their schools. They're currently in 84 schools across 16 states in 7 countries. He was also in Forbes 30 Under 30 and is a recipient of the Thiel Fellowship for his work with Hack Club. So Zach, that's the intro I have for you, man. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. And as you mentioned, I'm working at a nonprofit called Hack Club. We work with high schoolers to start really, really awesome after-school coding clubs. So if your high school had a service club or a math team or anything along those lines, we're just like that, but people are building really, really awesome apps, websites, and games in our clubs.
Tell us a little bit more about the Thiel Fellowship. I'm curious to know what exactly that is. I've done a little bit of reading up on it, but...
So the Thiel Fellowship is a $100,000 grant given by Peter Teal. He's a venture capitalist and has done a lot of work in the tech industry. And really what it fundamentally is an experiment to see what happens when you fund people to not go to school and pursue alternative paths instead. So I am a recipient of it. And what it actually looks like is we get a check every quarter. And then we're part of this really, really awesome community of other people that are working on similar things as us and are like similarly aged as well.
What was the process like to kind of apply? Did you apply or did they find you?
Yeah, so they do both, actually. So there is an application that everyone needs to submit on their website, but they do a bunch of outreach. I originally heard about it through someone who was actually part of the program, and they recommended me through there. But you apply, there's a couple stages of the process. For the final stage, they fly you out to San Francisco, put you in a hotel, and there's just a solid weekend of like interviews and dinners. It's like really, really intense. And a couple weeks later, they send their final decision over.
I've heard that you also kind of meet regularly with or have access to various mentors and stuff like that now.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the fellowship does a lot more than just give you money. They have a bunch of mentors that are really, really helpful when you're looking to get in touch with certain types of people. Oftentimes they can connect you with them. I personally get the most value out of just the fellowship community itself. I mean, never before have I seen so many people my age or even younger in some cases doing like so many incredible things. Every time I go to an event, I always feel like the dumbest person in the room, which is like a really great feeling.
That's awesome. So Zach, here at Successful Dropout, we help students go from leaving school early to becoming successful entrepreneurs if they feel that call. And the first step there is the scary decision on whether or not to leave school. And so it sounds like you've never even been to college. And I'd love for you to tell us why you made that decision. And also, kind of take us back to high school. And you mentioned you had kind of developed a curriculum for yourself and tested out early.
Yeah. So I'd like to say I treated this like an optimization problem where when I was in school, I looked at all my available options, go to school, not go to school, and everywhere in between, and picked the option that I thought would yield the highest potential. But really, that's not what happened. It was like a much more emotional decision than that. All throughout middle school, I always like really tried to do my best in my classes. I always wanted to be like the top on every test, all that good stuff. But I always felt a little bit disappointed by my schoolwork because what I loved was coding. I had been exposed to this early. I had like every day when I go home and work on games. But in school, I never quite felt like I was being as challenged as much as I wanted to. And I never really had the opportunity to write code. So I was hoping that would change when I got to high school. My teachers had told me all about how high school is like the real world and you have to solve like real world problems. But when I finally entered my freshman year, I found that it was honestly just more of the same. So I made my way through my freshman year and feeling like really, really demotivated. And my sophomore year, I kind of like came back into school and I said, you know what, like if I'm going to do high school, I'm really going to do high school. I'm going to give this my all. So I did that. And for the first month and a half, I tried to do everything I could to not only excel in high school, but make it fun for me. So one of the things I did was I actually used coding tools for all of my school projects. So when I went to math class, I was writing like my homework in LaTeX, which was totally not necessary. But like every page or every report I'd turn in was like beautifully formatted, just like any paper you'd get from a university. Because it's the same tool. But
what type of program is that?
Yeah,
exactly?
yeah. So it's called LaTeX. You may have seen it as latex. It has like crazy capitalization. But it's a tool that people use to basically format math notation in computers. So if you've ever read like a research paper that has that like very distinctive like serif font and lots of columns and stuff, that is LaTeX.
Right.
So I was using that tool just to like make it fun. And one day I went to my 10th grade chemistry class to turn in a paper. It was a lab report that I had typed up. And this was the first lab report for that class. And my teacher actually accused me of cheating because I turned in a typed up report instead of a handwritten one.
Really?
They said, you obviously found this online. I mean, like this is not what I expect from my students. And that was kind of like the breaking point for me, where I was like, wow, do I really want to invest the next 3 years of my life in a place where this sort of thinking is encouraged and pushed upon students? So that's when I started looking to alternatives. And as you mentioned, what I ended up doing was I kind of found this loophole in the California credit system where if you take college classes, either at a community college or a university, you can get high school credit for those courses too. So I was already a student at a local community college, and I did this like weird thing where I'd take some credits online, I would take credits at the community college, and like everything in between. I put together my own homeschooling program for the next 6 months or so. And finally, when I was old enough, because there was an age limit on this, I took this test called the CHESP, it's a special test in California that lets you test out of high school. It's just like the GED, except you actually graduate, and your high school is just listed as like the state of California. So I took that test and I was out. So that's my story, at least on like how I decided to drop out of school or do the equivalent.
And at that point, when you left high school, did you have were you thinking, oh, maybe I'll go to college, or was it just like, that's not the right path for me?
Well, the first thing I did was I gave myself options. So I'd been taking these community college classes in middle school and then my freshman year and then in 10th grade as well. And as a result of that and the different credits I'd taken, I had two options. I could either go to university. Oh, I actually really had three options. I could go to university as a regular student, do my best to get in and just join as a freshman, just a couple years earlier than most. I could go to a university and actually try to apply as a transfer student because I was basically done with my first 2 years of college by that point. And then I could jump straight into my junior year and just rush to graduate. Or I could try a different path where I'd like work in tech. And that's the one I ended up picking.
How did your friends and family react to that at all?
Well, the biggest thing was with my family. Both my parents are social workers, and social work is a field that's regulated by the government. So you need a social worker license to practice as a social worker, and degrees are a really important part of that. And also because of this, if you don't have advanced degrees in social work, you're often locked to really low pay grades, like 20, 30K a year. Social workers are some of the lowest paid workers in the nation. So the idea of me not going down the path to get a college degree was really, really scary for my parents, because when they were in school, they were being told, hey, if you actually don't get your master's, you're not going to like live any life outside of this. So that was really scary for them.
Yeah.
And what we ended up doing was my parents had kind of seen how happy writing code made me. I'd been making a little bit of money doing this. And we said, you know what, like, what if we did a 3-month trial where I would go to San Francisco? I was born and raised in Los Angeles, so not too far. I'd go to San Francisco. I'd try to live and work there for 3 months, and we'd see how it goes. And by the end of those 3 months, my parents had heard like so much about how much fun I was having, how much I was learning, the environment I was like surrounding myself in. And only then, like when we sat down and talked about it, did they finally feel on board. And I feel so incredibly lucky to have parents that have been so supportive and that were willing to take that risk. And yeah, I don't think I'd be anywhere where I am today without that.
What advice would you give somebody on how to best approach this with their friends or family based on your experience?
Put yourself in their shoes, see the situation from where they're seeing it. When I tried to do this with my parents, I was able to come to this solution with them. Identify what your parents or friends are worried about and try to alleviate those concerns.
Yeah, it sounds like you were able to come to a bit of a compromise where you said, well, let's test this out and see how it works, and we'll reevaluate after a certain period of time.
Yeah, and I was really, really lucky to have parents that were willing to give that a try. If I didn't, I don't know what I would do.
I hear you, man. I'm grateful to have some of the most supportive parents in the world, too. I've done some crazy stuff off the beaten path, and they've been very supportive the whole way.
That's awesome.
So I'd love to talk about kind of the first several months after you left high school. Now, I mean, you kind of went into it a bit, but I think that's a big question for a lot of us just thinking about dropping out of school. It's like, what do those first 6 months or even a year look like? Because it's such a crucial time. So what did that look like for you?
Yeah. One word, scary. I said, all right, like I'm out of school now. I'm out of the system, and it's like, crap. I mean, your life is now your responsibility. And if you fail, that's like only on you. So for my 6 months, I did decide, all right, so I'm young, so I'm already at a disadvantage. I don't have a lot of experience. I'm already at a disadvantage. I don't have a degree. I'm already at a disadvantage. What next moves can I take to put me in the most advantageous situations possible? And the most obvious one was changing my location. Los Angeles has a growing tech community, but I didn't have a car, so I couldn't actually get to where the people were. So I decided to move to San Francisco because it's like, all right, this is the place where I think I can do the best work. I'd be exposed to the most smart people and learn as much as possible. And I found a place. I met this one person that lived in this group house. They had a free room in the house, and I decided to go for it and take it. So I moved in, and day one, I basically used all the money I had to pay the security deposit. I had no idea how I was going to pay rent the first month. And that was like when it started getting really scary, which is like, all right, again, I'm not on any sort of formal path. How can I make ends meet as efficiently as possible? And the idea I had in mind was contracting, but when you actually asked me the details about what that entailed, I had no idea. But I ended up getting really lucky. So what happened was I'd been doing a little bit of contracting for the company you mentioned, Yo. And the day after I moved up, the CEO reached out to me and he said, like, hey, Zach, let's meet up for coffee tomorrow. So we met up the day after I moved up, and he gave me a job offer on the spot. And we negotiated a bit, and I ended up coming on as a contractor. The deal was I'd come on as a contractor, I'd lead the engineering team for the first few months right when they got started, and then I'd leave after I had basically satisfied the roles that we wrote down for me. So I did that, and I worked at Yo full time for the next 2 months. We made a couple hires. We like worked through all the stuff that we wanted to work through, and then after those first couple months, I had saved up pretty much all the money I made from that. And that's when I decided to leave Yo and take the step to properly start working on Hat Club and pursue this full time, because I'd known I'd been wanting to do it for a while. So then that was like really 3 months in. The remaining 3 months were like, okay, oh crap, how do I actually run an organization or a company / accomplish goals, all that good stuff.
So I think it's important that you mentioned, you realized, okay, crap, I'm out in the real world now. What are my advantages? What are my disadvantages? And, obviously a couple of your advantages were your knowledge and your passion for coding, and then also the fact that you could change your location. And I always try to break down, if we can, out of these stories, actionable advice, as well as the inspiration of the story, but also actionable advice that people can follow. So I just wanted to pull that out. And then, you mentioned the CEO of Yo kind of approached you. What do you think it was about you at that time that made you valuable to him in that way?
So I'd already been doing contracting for Yo. So I'd worked on a contracting project. We'd worked together before. He saw my quality of work. And like, despite being really young and inexperienced, I did have a portfolio. I'd worked on a number of open source projects, coding, and put those online. And some of them got a little bit popular. I had worked on an iOS game when I was in high school. I was, for all intents and purposes, interning, but my title wasn't actually an intern, at a local game studio where there were three of us. So I kind of like experienced a whole like really early stage company thing. We launched a game and it ended up doing really well. So I could say that I'd worked on an app that had like millions of users. So I had that. And I had some sense of a portfolio and we worked together. So like that definitely built the case for me.
Yeah. So now I want to kind of move into the entrepreneurship part of the show. And so, Zach, if you haven't really given us a rundown yet on Hat Club, and I'd love you to tell us about that business, kind of where the idea came from, or I guess it's a non-for-profit, but I guess where the idea came from and what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hat Club is a nonprofit that helps high schoolers start really awesome after-school coding clubs. So if your school had a volunteer service club or a movie club or anything along those lines, we're just like that, but for coding. So when you walk inside of a Hat Club meeting, you're seeing generally 15 to 20 high schoolers working on apps, games, websites, sometimes businesses, but also all sorts of other cool things. We see clubs make art and like actually run workshops for other local schools as well. So working on Hat Club, and we provide four main things to people who want to start Hat Clubs. We provide curriculum, so stuff to actually do in the club meetings themselves. Leadership training, so we're on the phone with every single club leader when they're getting the club started. A community, so when you join Hat Club, you're instantly part of something a lot larger than yourself. If you're a leader, you're surrounded by hundreds of other leaders who have done the same thing. And also, if you're a member, when you join a Hat Club, you're joining a community of 1,500 people that are doing the same thing as well. And then finally, we run events for our clubs as well. So the story for Hat Club is when I entered high school, when I was feeling kind of demotivated about the whole school thing, on top of that, I was really disappointed to find that my school, like 75% of high schools in the US, didn't offer any coding classes.
Right.
And again, I got really lucky. I got exposed to coding early on. I had like ended up Googling some stuff and somehow got into it. So I was really disappointed to find that I couldn't do the one thing I really, really cared about in the place where I spent all my time. So a friend and I were like, all right, we want people to like do computer stuff with and write code with, but they simply don't exist at this school. So if we want that community, we're going to have to actually find those people and train them and build the community from scratch. So we started a coding club together. And fast forward a few months after I had met other high school students from really across the nation who had done the same thing that we did, for the same reason that we did and saw the same success as us, I started asking the question, well, okay, like we are doing this club at our school, other people are doing it at their schools, but there's no unity between us. We're all running into the exact same problems.
Right.
And this would be so much more powerful if we were doing things together, like competitions across clubs. So that's really where the idea for Hat Club came from, which is like I went through this myself. I started a club myself. This is something I really wanted in high school. And like other people had done it too. It wasn't an isolated case, but nobody had brought anything together. And then fast forward a few years after I'd left, or not really a few years, fast forward like a year and a half, I guess, after I'd left Yo, and I really knew I wanted to work on this because it was like, hey, if I'm going to really focus on making coding as free and accessible as possible to students everywhere, the time is now, because I'm still the age of high schoolers. I'm still a part of this high school community that's online. And I don't think I'd be able to do this if I was in my mid-20s, simply because there's so many like small cultural nuances you have to understand. So that's when I decided to go for it.
I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about why you think, kind of the why behind coding, like why you think it's so important.
Yeah. Well, I think coding is the most powerful tool that humanity has ever devised. I mean, really, never before has an individual, or really has the individual, had so much power and so much potential to reach so many people. 45% of the world population is online right now. That's over 3 billion people. And that number is increasing rapidly. So it is like hard to fathom how much power is in the hands of people who know how to code. But the real problem is that coding isn't really accessible. As I mentioned, 3 out of 4 schools in the US don't teach any coding at all. And in many of the schools that do, they're introducing it as this thing that isn't here to change the world, but as another math, where you're using it to solve theoretical problems instead of actually applying coding to work on the stuff that you really care about. If I had to say, my favorite thing about coding is just how flexible the medium it is. I really like to think of code as a canvas, because you as an individual can build anything you want. You can build anything from music to games to really anything else. So what's cool about code is it makes you realize you can do anything, and it gives you the means to do it. It's really like really the closest thing to a superpower that we have.
That's an awesome way to describe it. I love, like, what's like a couple maybe specific examples of how maybe you've used coding in the past for maybe people that aren't as familiar with coding.
Let me tell you about one of the people who used to run a hack club at his school. So his name is Rohith, and the way he used coding was he was looking at populations in the US and elsewhere that had cell phones but didn't have internet access. So they could call and text people, but data plans were super expensive, so they didn't have any internet access. So he thought would be cool is, what if we, instead of having to force people to buy a data plan for their phone, what if we sent people the internet through text messages? So if you want to visit a website, we would actually text all the data needed to visit that website over to your phone, and then we have a special app that would like load the website and show it as it actually is. So people who had texting plans could access the internet without paying anything else. So he built this, and they built it at an event called a hackathon. These are these really cool 24-hour, 36-hour long coding festivals where it's like nonstop coding marathon. So he built it at one of these, and there was a bunch of press that came out about it. I mean, they had everyone from like Android magazines to like Time.com writing about Cosmos browser. And later on, he decided to turn it into a company. So what ended up happening was they got accepted by Techstars, which is it's a startup accelerator, and I believe he might actually be one of the youngest people to be accepted to Techstars. And they've since turned this into like a real product that is actually being deployed throughout Detroit right now. And I think that's just an incredibly inspiring story, because here's this guy who's a regular high schooler, built this app because really, again, coding lets you do anything, and you have the same tools in your hand as the best engineers in the world because it's all online. And he was able to make this huge life transition as a result of that.
That's an incredible story, man. For anybody that's listening that might be thinking about getting into coding, really finding this interesting, what are some steps you'd say to take for somebody that kind of knows nothing but wants to get into it?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so this is going to sound not super specific, but as I'm sure everyone like listening to this knows, the hardest problems are very ambiguous. It's like how to start a business, right?
Yeah.
So my view is that one of the better ways to learn to code is to simply write code. And that's kind of like a catch-22. What I do is I would pick a very simple project that you want to do. Say you want to get a website online, and it doesn't need to be advanced. You just want to have like 3 words on a website on a real domain. So like when you go to my3words.com, it just shows up those 3 words. It's all you want to do. And keep Googling until you make that happen. 99% of coding is just using Google to figure out the answer. And this is both as a beginner, as someone who's never written any code before, but also as an engineer at Facebook. So literally just pick a small pet project like that, and then just keep Googling to figure out the answers until you finally get something online. And if you keep doing that, my personal way of doing this is for a while, I forced myself to write code every single day. So I'd like check off the day if I wrote some code that day. And I'd keep picking these pet projects and working on them until I started getting to bigger and bigger projects. Like, how do I build something like Twitter instead of just a basic website that doesn't move? And if you keep doing that, it's inevitable that you're going to be a really, really good programmer. And this is how almost every self-taught programmer taught themselves. They picked a pet project, they just kind of Googled until they figured it out, and then got it online.
I love what you said about coding being ambiguous, and the same with starting a business. It's this kind of ambiguous thing. There's really no one formula that you can use to make it happen. But the first thing you've got to do is just pick a small goal and approach it and just start doing it and just kind of hacking away at this just little chunks at a time. And eventually you find yourself, right in the middle of a giant, project or a startup.
Exactly. And I do want to throw out there, if you're in high school and you're asking yourself this question, the answer is to join the Hack Club at your high school. And if there isn't one there yet, start a Hack Club.
Yep.
I also want to mention that there are a lot of tools online, like Codecademy or Treehouse.com, and a lot of these have really good resources with lots of tutorials on how to get started with coding. These can provide a really great point to start off with, which is like, I want to learn the very, very fundamentals. But I think if you really want to learn to code, the best method, or at least one of the better methods, is to just work on pet projects and keep going until you get something working.
Great point. So Zach, how do you generate revenue right now, or how do you plan to in the future?
Yeah, so we are a nonprofit. Want to throw that out there. And being a nonprofit doesn't mean that you can't make revenue. All it means is that you don't have stock in the company. So the company, when you incorporate it, actually doesn't have any stock. It's ruled by a board of directors instead of like shareholders. And all the money has to be reinvested in the company. We keep everything completely free and accessible for students, schools, and teachers. So everything's totally free. And in fact, all of our content is open sourced too, which means not only is it free to access, but also it's free to edit. Anyone can change it. It's kind of like Wikipedia. And then also anyone can use it in other resources as well. The way we make money is through donations from individuals and from foundations. So our typical donor profile is someone who's like done well in tech or some other industry and is looking to give back, and they really wish they had this sort of thing when they were in high school, or a foundation that really believes, like us, that coding can change lives, both in terms of bringing people through socioeconomic levels, but also just making people feel incredibly, incredibly empowered. And we have support from foundations as well.
Are you finding that it's gaining a lot of outside support? Is that successful?
We've gotten more support than I was anticipating early on. We have an incredible list of funders that have just like really, I've been blown away by how supportive they've been and how helpful they've been in every step of the way.
So Zach, what has been your worst entrepreneurial moment on your journey so far?
It's funny you ask this because it has to do with funding. So a year ago, I can't believe it's actually been a year ago now, but a year ago was kind of the moment where we sat down and we were like, all right, we've been working on Hack Club for a few months. We've seen like exciting early traction, but also there's tons of problems with it. But we know that this is something that we want to continue working on. The problem is that we've been living off of our personal savings and we don't have that much personal savings left. So our only option was to raise money or generate revenue. And we really thought raising money through donations was a better way to go because we did care so much about making everything free and accessible. So the problem was like, we didn't know how to raise money. It's very different getting money from foundations and it's very different when getting money as a nonprofit than as a for-profit, because the pitch is different. Your pitch is not that you're going to generate return in terms of money or dollars. The return you're going to generate is social impact. And social impact can be hard to quantify, and it's hard to kind of build strong pitches around that. So for basically 3 months, we just like emailed every single person we could find about like giving us money. And somehow through some like black magic or like in reality, a friend that was really helpful, we got connected with this foundation called the Riva and David Logan Foundation. And they're based in Chicago. They're a family foundation. And we were talking with one of the directors there, and they really liked the work we were doing with Hack Club and they wanted to support us. And after working with them for a few weeks, we secured our first grant from a foundation. And then in the period of those few weeks, we also got our first 2 individual contributors to sign on. And really, that was like a huge breakthrough for us after those few months, because it was really bleak for a while, where it was like, crap, we have like 2 months to like get some sort of cash in the bank. So that was definitely like one of those like lows I would describe, and that was definitely very challenging.
Is there a lesson that you can pull out of that for our audience at all?
If you're fundraising as a nonprofit, the first thing you should do, which we did not do early enough, was talk to other people who fundraise as a nonprofit. It's really easy to talk to people who have fundraised for for-profit, and like a lot of their advice does not apply because the pitch you're making is very different. Once we started talking with other people who had done startup nonprofits, did we start to feel a lot more clarity in what we were doing. So there's that. And then the other thing is, at least when fundraising is a nonprofit, and I imagine this applies as a for-profit as well, it's really just a numbers game. We probably reached out to like 300 or 400 people and got like 10 people on board. And that's all it took. So yeah, definitely like numbers game as well.
Tell us the story of a light bulb or an aha moment that you had.
So this one was also like a year ago or so. So this was last summer, and we were running our summer program, which we called Hack Camp. So the way Hack Camp worked was it was a 2-week summer program for high schoolers who had never written any code before, and we were going to introduce web development to them. So how to build websites and other stuff on the internet. And really, we didn't mention this in our marketing, but really the real reason we run Hack Camp is to improve the content for our clubs. Hack Camp is just the first 4 months of a hack club compressed into 2 weeks. And we were taking Hack Camp last year to really like flesh out what we wanted our curriculum to look like. The first session, we threw everything we thought about away and started from scratch and built a curriculum just for that session. Second session came along. So this was like, we are now in July. We did it again because we were like, you know what, we did not like what we had in that first session, despite the ratings. Second session, same deal, like did not like it. We were going to throw away everything for the third session again. And at this point, we were really worried because it's like, wow, we really need some sort of breakthrough or else we're not going to have a solid curriculum for the following school year. And what we ended up doing was just kind of like stuck. And one night I was talking with one of the people on the team. This was before the third session started. And we just realized like our approach has been wrong the entire time because we're thinking of ourselves as teachers. And really, like, if we want to produce the best and most excited and passionate coders, we should look into how we actually learn to code ourselves and how the most passionate coders we learn to code too. And what we found was, literally every single, when we listed out the people we knew that like we thought of as the best programmers, every single one of them was self-taught. And when they were teaching themselves, they did exactly what I mentioned earlier. They worked on tons of pet projects. And they didn't understand everything every step of the way. And we started out by asking ourselves questions, or in the first or second session, we asked ourselves questions like, how can we introduce these concepts in programming and then wrap them up in some sort of like project? When really what we should have been doing, the approach we ended up taking was like, how can we get people super, super psyched about coding? Because if people are super excited and psyched about it, they're going to learn the rest on their own when they're on Google trying to solve problems as they like build their own projects. So that's the approach we took. And what we ended up doing was we made a series of these 30 to 40 minute written tutorials that would walk the camp members through the process of building some real project. So for example, the first tutorial walks you through building your first website and getting it online. So by the end of that workshop, you actually have something tangible that you built that is at a URL. You can open it on your phone. You can open it on your mom's phone. Like it's very real. You use all of the same tools that real programmers use. And you probably didn't understand 90% of what it took to do, what it took to do that. And that's okay, because as you keep building more and more projects, you're going to realize where you don't understand things, and you're going to fill in those knowledge gaps yourself. So anyways, we ended up doing this, and we ran this for the third session with these tutorials, and we left a lot of time for people to work on projects and built structure around that. And then it worked really, really well. And then we did it again for the final session of Hack Camp. And same thing, it worked really, really well. We turned that into our club curriculum. And that's actually that became the model and the template for every single hack club today, which is like, we're here, we think of ourselves as lifeguards. We're here to encourage you to jump off the deep end, but also make sure you don't drown when you're like being exposed to all these new concepts, because we don't want you to get demotivated. So that was definitely an aha moment that had a really big impact on the organization.
Ooh, I love that, man. That's such a great story. If you had to kind of narrow that down to one kind of lesson takeaway from that, what do you think that would be?
I mean, this is pretty common advice, and it's hard because with a lot of this like these advice and like lessons, you can hear them all you want, but you don't internalize them until you've gone through it yourself. So like this was something that like I heard and I thought I understood until we actually did it, which is like let yourself experiment and like take risks. Like for us, I was throwing away all of our curriculum. But also it's important to identify when you have a good enough solution and when you can just continue to improve something. So when we had this tutorial like model thought of, there were a lot of issues with it. And it was like the tutorials like lacked quality in some ways, like people get lost at different parts of them. But also there were bigger questions, which is like, are people actually going to internalize this effectively? And we had mixed results, like overall positive, but there were a lot of issues. But what we decided to do was treat this as a good enough solution where it's like, all right, like this is our best option right now. And by spending the past year on this, we've taken it from something that's good enough to something I think is like really, really, really high quality. So at least that was like the personal takeaway for me, which is like sometimes it's okay to recognize like when something is only good enough and keep working on that until it's great, but later on, because it's important that you actually have a solution today.
If you could time travel back to day one of your entrepreneurial journey and have 10 minutes with your former self to communicate any lessons you've acquired with the intention of saving yourself mistakes and heartache, what would you tell yourself?
Yes. Yeah, that kind of goes back to what I said earlier, which is I feel like it's one thing to hear lessons and hear advice, and it's another to internalize them. And like nearly every way I've grown in the past few years, like I already knew that I should be doing these things, and like I thought I understood them, but I didn't actually internalize whatever the advice was until much later on, when I actually had to go through it myself. So I'm not sure if I like gave advice to my former self, if that would actually mean anything, because I'd probably think like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, I'll do it, and then like not actually understand what doing it means. Because there is value in going through the motions yourself and failing, and then like drawing your own lessons from that. But what I would say is which is like you like be aware that you're going to fail, even at things that you think you understand. And there's just like some pieces of advice and like lessons and whatnot that you have to just go through the motions yourself to understand, no matter how much you hear them. And then the second thing would be like inbox zero. You're going to get a lot of emails, and it's important you build a way of managing that sooner than later. There's nothing worse than letting people down on communication. So the way I manage my inbox now is I use Gmail. I treat my inbox in like two ways. My actual inbox is incoming mail that I haven't even looked at yet. And I do this process called triaging, where I go through every single item in my email list. And if I decide that this is something that is actionable that I need to respond to or take action on, I star it and then I archive it. If it's not, I just archive it immediately. So I triage my inbox, then I get to inbox zero, and then I switch over to my starred messages. And every single starred message is an email that I have to respond to or I have to take action on. So then it's very clear what your actual workload is for emails and like what you need to do to get through all of it. And you can just get in the zone and respond to all of them. I did not have this sort of system early on. And it like really, yeah, there were a lot of cases where I like messed up on emails or communication, that like actually severely impacted my work. So that was, if I had to like give one piece of advice, it'd probably be like that system, because that's something that's very easy to act on once you know it. And it worked really well for me.
What is a personal habit that contributes to your success?
Well, I don't know how I feel about the word success because I definitely wouldn't consider myself successful. But in terms of personal habits, one of the things I do is this thing called don't break the chain, or at least that's what I like to call it. Where when I want to start doing something new, um, I I commit to doing it every single day. And I found that if I don't do it every single day, then I generally just drop it entirely. So, for example, one of the things right now for me is running. About 2 months ago, I decided, you know what, like I actually want to like have some sort of good regular exercise because I know it's just like healthy for me. And yeah, this is like a personal goal that I want to accomplish. So what I did was I said, all right, I'm going to run every single day. No excuses. Any day I don't run, I owe $10 to my friend. Um, and I've over the past 2 months, I've ran nearly every single day. I think I've missed like 3 or 4 days total. And I've gone from barely being able to run like a mile without feeling winded, to like running more. Like I'm still like getting there, but now I can run like 4 or 5 miles, and I feel okay, which is something that me in high school would have never thought to be possible. So this whole like don't break the chain thing, which is like, all right, you've done this for 7 days in a row. Do I really want the eighth day to be the day I don't do this? Um, to be a mechanism that's really, really effective for me. When I entered high school, one of the other things I wanted to do was to get a lot better at writing code. I'd written code, I'd like worked on projects, but I really wanted to become, or at least feel like a good programmer. So what I did was I did the same thing. I did don't break the chain, where I committed, you know, I'm going to write at least one line of code every single day. And it can be as insubstantial as I want, but it has to be something. And I did that for 600 days in a row. And I went from like thinking I knew a lot about programming to realizing I know nothing about programming, and then actually being able to work on real projects. Because before I'd ask myself questions like, all right, I know how to write like a program that can print stuff to the console and then like you can respond to it and all that. But how do I build a real project like twitter.com to actually building a fake twitter.com and working on much more advanced stuff? So this is a mechanism that has worked really, really well for me. The other habit I have is I at least for me, I find that I benefit a lot from having a solid daily routine. So my current thing, which I've been doing for the past few weeks, and we'll see if it sticks, but I've found my productivity really skyrocket the past couple weeks, is I go to bed at 8 or 9, and then I wake up at 4 or 5. I immediately go on a run, and then I shower, and I'm just like set, ready for my day, usually like before 6 a.m. And it just feels awesome. Like between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m., I'll like accomplish more than I thought possible between 1 p.m. and like 3 p.m.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? I have the same habit. It's been phenomenal. And yeah, that's my most productive time is right in that pocket. And
Yep.
it seems like 80-90% of the successful entrepreneurs I've listened to, heard about, talked to, they have that strong morning routine. And the idea is you win the morning, you win the day.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what do you consider success to be as an entrepreneur? Because success is relative kind of to the individual, right? And you mentioned that you wouldn't consider yourself successful yet, but have you defined that for yourself, what success means? And if so, what is that?
My current working hypothesis for my goal for life is a pretty typical one. It's like I want to have as much impact as I can. How I define impact, what types of impact I want to have will probably change over time. But the one thing I think I'm relatively set on is I want to work on high impact problems or fund high impact problems that other people aren't, whether because it's too controversial or just because it's neglected. So that's like my personal goal / like mission statement, and I'm sure that's going to change over time. Again, just a working hypothesis. I don't think I have a really solid goal for what success looks like for me, and I don't know if I ever really will. But yeah, I mean I'm trying to live up to like that working hypothesis as much as possible.
What is a quality that you have that you would consider essential to being an entrepreneur?
One of the things that I have benefited a lot from is like very explicitly not giving up learning the moment I left school. And I know that's like a very common thing, but I've actually found it to be really helpful. Where like I generally have one topic that I'm like trying to work through and properly learn at a time. So right now I'm trying to learn a lot more about this idea of deep learning, which is not just how can we like train computers to do things like identify spam in your email, but how can we like not explicitly teach a computer how to change an image and instead teach a computer how to do certain sorts of things with an image. This is like what most people call this AI. It's like right now I'm working through a textbook on that. And I generally try to have one or two things along those lines that I'm working through. And I don't know if I consider that essential as an entrepreneur, but I've definitely found that essential as a human being, because I do have like this like really huge desire to learn. And I feel like if I wasn't like constantly trying to very explicitly learn about like specific new things, I don't know if I'd keep up with it, because it's so easy to be distracted by like work or like whatever it is.
So being a continual learner, basically.
Yeah, if I had to summarize it, that's what I would say. Again, pretty ambiguous thing. In terms of, I don't even know if like any of my habits would be considered essential as an entrepreneur, because I don't have definitive proof that they work as an entrepreneur yet either. Hack Club's still in its very early stages.
Mm-hmm. What book would you recommend to us and why?
There's this author, his name is Neal Stephenson, and he writes these like amazing science fiction novels. And when I say novel, I really mean like novel in like an epic sense of the word. All of his books are really long, really detailed, like really thorough. Most people categorize his writing under the genre of hard science fiction, where it's not just speculating about what the future, what the past, or what some reality might look like, but there's evidence to back a lot of what's being talked about. The Martian, which was really popular in late 2015, the book The Martian is like a really good way to get into this genre. It's like very well researched. But so Neal Stephenson has a book called Snow Crash that it's one of my favorite books of all time. I recommend it to everyone. It's about like post-apocalyptic or really like post-capitalism Los Angeles. And I don't want to give away the plot, but there's a bunch of interesting things that are happening. The environment is just like so ridiculously cool. What ended up happening was like, I don't remember all the specifics, but basically the world has been taken over by franchises, where it's no longer just restaurants that are franchises. Entire cities and even countries have become franchises. So if you want to live under Hong Kong law, you could go to the Hong Kong franchise, and there'd be like multiple in an area. Anyways, very, very cool environment. And the other cool thing about the book is it was one of the first, it came out in like the late 80s or maybe early 90s, but it was one of the first books that really talked about virtual reality. And there's this thing called the metaverse in the book. And actually some of the terms that we use when talking about VR today are from this book, because this was such an in-depth look at like what that might look like. I believe he coined the word avatar. So if you've ever seen the word avatar online to describe like a profile picture, I believe that's from this book.
No way. Interesting.
It's amazing. It's one of my favorite books of all time. Highly recommend to all.
What is an internet resource or an app that you would recommend?
Ooh, yes. So this will probably only be relevant to programmers. There's this text editor called Emacs. It's a thing used by a lot of programmers to write code. It's kind of like Microsoft Word, but for code. And there's a bunch of options for it. And Emacs is like one of the more hardcore things that people go for. What's specifically cool about Emacs is you can actually write code to program your editor itself. So instead of just writing code to build a website, you can write code to like change your editor while you're building the website. So there's like a lot of really cool things you can do with it. But the coolest is the community of like the plugins the community has made. There's one in particular I really like called Org Mode. And the Org Mode is kind of like a note-taking organization thing inside of Emacs. It's basically like Evernote, but inside of Emacs. And what's so cool about Org Mode is like really, I think it's like 15 years ago now, some professor at some university was like using Emacs and decided, you know what, I want to take notes using Emacs, and I don't like just using plain old text files. So I want to like add some stuff to make note taking easier. So he added outlining, and he added like a couple different things to So you can have like headings in your notes. So publish this online, and then other people were like, oh, you know what? Like I also want to-do lists in my notes. I can add to-dos. So they added to-dos. And over the past 15 years, just like tons of people have just been adding like more and more features to this thing where it's hard to describe it as like an Evernote because it does so many crazy things you can think of. So what's cool about Emacs is like, so specifically what I'm recommending is org mode. What's cool about org mode is it's like a note-taking environment that you can do like really anything you could ever imagine in because someone else has probably thought of it and put it in. And if they haven't, it's really easy to write it on your own. So for example, like you can use org mode to turn your regular old notes into a website and publish it directly from org mode and put it out a domain. You can then take those same notes and like write a script on them to like reorganize the way they're categorized. And then you can, like generate a research paper out of them because it can turn your notes into research papers. It has like to-do lists where it has this like crazy to-do list management system, which includes a calendar. So mine is actually synced with my calendar. So I see like, it's hard to explain, but if you really get into it and invest the time, it's like this amazingly useful tool that I really have not seen anywhere else.
Right. Well, it sounds like it's all made possible by just coding too, which like you were saying earlier is just, it's almost like a superpower. It seems you can literally build anything.
Exactly. Yeah. And imagine just like if 1,000 people got together and were like, let's build the best possible like note-taking app. And then they wrote down all the stuff they wanted and then all of the features were implemented. like no rejection. It's really, really awesome.
What advice do you have for our listeners who are thinking of dropping out of college to become an entrepreneur?
I mean, the first thing I'd recommend is be rational about it. Think about your options. Think about like the ups and downs of the different options you have. Make pros and cons lists, and really make sure you can have like a formal justification for any decision you make. One of the biggest takeaways I personally had from learning to code and from programming in general is that when you write code, there are thousands of ways to do, or thousands of ways to solve any given problem. So if I want to do something like establish an audio connection between two people, like the way you and I are talking right now, literally thousands of different ways to do that. There's different programming languages I can use. There's different like ways I can actually connect our two networks. There's different ways we can send the data over. There's different ways to format the data. And the thing is there's always more than one solution that's correct. And every single solution has its own ups and downs. So in some situations, one solution that might look like a bad idea might actually be the one that has the most upside. Anyways, I think this idea that there are multiple solutions to any given problem is one that you can apply to life as well, and even to big problems like getting an education. So be aware of that, but also be aware that sometimes the solution that you want isn't going to be the one that best fits your needs. And if you want to drop out of college, really think it through because your wants may not actually align with what might be the best decision for you. Just like how I might want to use one programming language to set up a script to talk between the two of us, but really another one would be the best solution. So like check yourself on that. And yeah, I mean, not super specific, but basically think through any large decision you make.
What advice do you have for our listeners who've already dropped out and who are on their entrepreneurship journey? So kind of in your situation.
So I think this also applies to people that are in school too. But I really think that the world would be a better place if everyone thought more from first principles. So what I mean by that is really trace back your decision making. When you think about one thing you do in life, like for example, I'm going to eat eggs this morning. Ask yourself why, and then ask yourself why, and then ask yourself why until you can't ask why anymore, and then trace back that thought pattern to see if that is really the right decision for you to make. I think it's so easy for people to get caught up into hype or into what's popular or whatever it is. And I really think making sure that you're continuing to think as an individual and questioning your assumptions is extremely important. Peter Thiel talks a lot about this sort of thinking. The word he uses is like contrarian thinking, where it's like try to think outside of the box in his book. And I really think the world would be a better place if everyone did that.
What's the best way that people can connect with you?
Yeah, my email's on my website, zachlatta.com. Please feel free to reach out, and I will do my best to see if I can be helpful.
Successful Dropouts, you've been hanging out with Zach and Kylan, learning what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed as an entrepreneur. For everything we talked about today, head over to successfuldropout.com and type Zach into the search bar, and the show notes will pop right up. And as always, stay hungry, stay foolish. For more information about how to drop out, grind, and succeed, go to successfuldropout.com. I also love questions. If you have a question about anything we talked about today, I want to hear from you. Go to successfuldropout.com and click the Ask Me a Question link at the top of the page. Hey, next week on the show we have Derek McGill. This guy is a self-taught marketer whose skills have generated millions of dollars. Now he works for a company that specializes in providing alternative routes for guys and gals like you who want to step away from the traditional educational system. Don't miss it.